A quick look at the top grossing films of Indian cinema in recent years, whether from the Hindi film industry or from the southern languages like Tamil or Telugu, immediately reveals that Indian audiences seem to love hypermasculine and violent heroes with chiseled bodies and ripped muscles. Whether the theme is history or science fiction, crime or family drama, there is a taste for extreme violence such as never before seen on the silver screen. Even sensitive lead actors with the softest faces and the best dance moves no longer hesitate to play killers and psychopaths. Storylines are contrived to allow these macho men to behave in threatening and sometimes abusive ways towards their leading ladies. Your typical blockbuster romance was always sexist in any case, and movie plots, like real life, seldom stray far from patriarchy. Now, justified by backstories of childhood trauma and emotional scarring, misogyny and violence against women are normalized in the new Bollywood. But it isn't just popular culture where this kind of anger and aggression is glorified. In the sphere of religious politics, too, everywhere we see images of our gods and goddesses in unfamiliar postures. Today, Krishna is much more likely to wield his deadly Sudarshan chakra or rise up in the towering shape of an all-consuming Kal than play his cowherd's flute or dally with his shy playmate Radha in the sylvan forest by the Yamuna. Ram is no longer an unhappy prince in exile whose stepmother plotted to deprive him of his throne and whose young wife was abducted, but a warrior of superhuman strength going into battle with his adversary Ravan along with his demonic hordes. Hanuman, from being a devoted servant of Ram and Sita, has assumed a more muscular form. While he can still leap across the oceans, he now exhibits a ferocity that has not been seen before. Now, deities who, in any case, always had aspects of destruction already built into their iconography, like Shiva or Durga, are now much more likely to have their stotras rendered in death metal, and their representations appear in much of these new sorts of outlandish and grotesque styles of anime and manga. So you can see a kind of Rodra or Chanda or a Bhayanak roop of these deities. Virility and vengeance, our heroes, our idols, our saviors, and our soulmates are all becoming ever more frightening. Now, the roots of this transformation of our gods and heroes into figures who are terrifying actually goes back to the late 19th century, at the start of British colonial rule over India. It was as a response to the growing might of the British Empire and the defeat of the Indian resistance in 1857 that many writers and artists began to seek powerful symbols in our own history, in our mythology and literature, to provide some sense of pride, of self-respect, and instill the confidence that we too are capable of defending ourselves against the colonizers. Michael Madhusudan Dutt's epic Meghnad Vad Kavya, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Gopal Krishna Gokhale's histories of Chhatrapati Shivaji with his Maratha dynasty and his quest to establish a Hindavi Swarajya, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's novel Anand Math with its story based on the Sannyasi rebellion, as well as Bankim's presentation of Sri Krishna as the diplomat, statesman, and philosopher of the Bhagavad Gita. These are all examples of the early turn to models of strength, masculinity, and preparedness for war in the sphere of cultural production. Swami Vivekananda, who died young at the beginning of the 20th century, wanted Hindus to infuse their faith with both physical prowess and intellectual clarity, drawing on age-old beliefs and ideals surrounding male asceticism. He reinvigorated the disciplines of Vedanta and yoga, which had traditionally been associated, or rather the exclusive domain of Brahmin men, specifically for the historical context of colonialism. Now, this early phase of the Swadeshi movement waned by the end of the first decade of the 20th century. An important thinker like Rabindranath Tagore expressed his doubts about militant nationalism in his novel Ghare Baire, The Home and the World. And his nephew, the artist Abanindranath Tagore, made a painting of Banga Mata, who later became Bharat Mata, as a softly hued icon of maternal care and nurture rather than a fierce goddess of war and weaponry. The Tagores changed the tenor of anti-colonial discourse. Rabindranath saw that resorting to religious nationalism, whether Hindu or Muslim, only allowed the colonial state to divide Indians along communal lines, as was seen in the first partition of Bengal in 1905. Patriotic slogans like Vande Mataram and Bharat Mata Ki Jai could act as a double-edged weapon. On the one hand, signaling Indian opposition to British authorities, but on the other hand, providing a limited idea of who were the legitimate offspring of Mother India and who could at best count as stepchildren. Tagore followed up his novel with 3 essays strongly criticizing nationalism as an ideology that was at that time globally ascendant during World War I. He addressed these essays to India, to the US, and to Japan, which was a bold move at that time. Now, 3 decades after Tagore's early critique, Jawaharlal Nehru, in his classic text of Nationalism, The Discovery of India, asks, who is Bharat Mata? For him, the abstract figure of the country as a mother or a map morphs into the very people of India. As he says, the millions of eyes that look into his eyes as he makes his campaign speeches in 1936-37, the millions of hands that are raised to greet him as he travels all over the land. Bharat Mata is the body politic. As such, what later becomes in the preamble of the Indian Constitution of 1950, we the people of India. Belonging and attachment, nature and nurture, sharing and caring, all are perfectly embodied in this feminine form. In the mother's heart, there is a place for everyone. But the real turning point, I would say, comes with Mohandas Gandhi's Hind Swaraj in 1909. Gandhi proposed Hind Swaraj as the answer to British Raj. But in his conception, this was not going to be merely the replacement of English rule by Indian rule, because Gandhi insisted that we think carefully about this category of Swaraj. It is Swaraj, he wrote, when we learn to rule ourselves. In order to do this, we have to think carefully about both parts of this term Swaraj. That is to say, both the Swa, having to do with the self, and Raj, having to do with sovereignty. First, we have to answer the question, who or what is the self? And then we may turn to the problem of rule. Is Swaraj rule over the self, or is it ruled by the self? How can we understand what form this rulership is to take if we have no knowledge about the self in the first place? In order for the Indian self, which could be thought of as individual or collective, because both levels are simultaneously present in Gandhi's conceptualization, in order for this self to face and fight the colonizer, it cannot answer violence with counter-violence. Because the adversary is much more powerful, whether politically or economically or technologically. So trying to challenge the colonial state on its own terms is to fight from a position of disadvantage and to be certain of defeat. Gandhi therefore advocated a completely unprecedented form of response to colonial violence, and this was non-violence or ahimsa. What is ahimsa? To understand ahimsa, we have to look at himsa first. In Sanskrit, hinsa is hantum ichha, the desire or intention to harm, hurt, injure, or kill. With the negation of this desire in the self, ahimsa, we get rid of that fundamental instinct to destroy the other. We are now in a position not of weakness, but of a hitherto unexpected form of strength. We must face what Gandhi called in Gujarati top bal and baju bal with atma bal and daya bal. In other words, we must counter brute force with soul force. This soul force is what Gandhi named satyagraha, holding fast to that which is right and true, satya. As we know from our national motto, which is taken from the Mundaka Upanishad, Satyameva Jayate. It is truth alone that prevails, that conquers, and that is victorious. In English, satyagraha is sometimes translated as passive resistance, which I think is not as effective as soul force. Because here we see an emphasis on passivity in the face of an active onslaught from the enemy. And resistance assumes a meaning of being fixed in one position. On the other hand, soul force suggests that even something insubstantial like the soul, our very being, the swa of Swaraj, has the capacity to exercise force or bal. That is to say, to have an effect on the circumstances in which we find ourselves. We can actively change the situation we are in. We are inherently capable. We have agency. Because remember that the origin of this force is at the very level of intention, ichha, from which we have removed or withheld or negated the killer instinct. Rather, whatever the provocation or threat, whatever the punishment or the injustice, we hold fast to the truth, satya. Now, together then, these novel Gandhian ideas, these weapons of the weak, so to speak, Swaraj, Ahimsa, and Satyagraha, came to define a new courage that gives direction to a new anti-colonial struggle, one which became impossible for the British to suppress or defeat because Gandhi had changed the rules of engagement. Now, as is well known, Gandhiji drew his strength from a number of discourses and sources, including spiritual practice and religious faith. We can think of charkha and khadi, fasting and walking, cleaning toilets and collective prayer, all as techniques for building up the inner resources necessary to confront an adversary who was vastly more powerful than the self. Crucially, by bringing Swaraj and Swadeshi into the hands and homes of people, into the minds and the bodies of people, Gandhiji was able to include and involve women in the freedom struggle. The first political mass movements that Indian women took part in were the civil disobedience, salt satyagraha, and quit India movements led by Gandhi. These large-scale mobilizations of the female half of the population are what paved the way for egalitarian citizenship, electoral democracy, and universal adult franchise at the time of independence. For our purposes, I want to point to two figures who were central to Gandhi, his efforts at building up Atmabal. These were Sri Krishna and Sri Ram. Gandhiji read a section of the Bhagavad Gita every single day together with his ashram inmates, associates. Once they had read through the 18 chapters over several days, he started once again from the beginning. Think carefully about why Gandhiji read and discussed a discourse about necessary violence and filial duty conducted between Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra on the eve of the Mahabharata war in order to develop, paradoxically, a theory of ahimsa or nonviolence. This was because Krishna was trying to teach Arjuna not himsa, harm, but kartavya, duty, that which has to be done. Not conquest, but courage. This was the very lesson that the Mahatma hoped that Indians would use in their battle for Swaraj. We do not want English rule without the Englishman, he said. It is Swaraj when we learn to rule ourselves. First and foremost, we have to achieve mastery over our own unruly self. Now, while Hind Swaraj is one way to name the goal of the freedom struggle, Gandhiji often described his ideal of sovereignty, again in opposition to British Raj, as Ram Raj. Now, what did he mean by this? Ram Raj is the most just of kingdoms, ruled by the most perfect of kings, Ram himself. Gandhi wanted to evoke through this term Ram Rajya, which was of course known to millions of ordinary people, a benign home rule as opposed to the ruthless colonial state on the one hand, but also a more abstract domain of a moral society which was governed by dharma or righteousness. In his daily prayers, the Bhajanavali, he included a number of songs which all of us know, I think. Sri Ramchandra Kripalu Bhajaman, which is actually by Tulsidas, Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram, which is called the Ram Dhun, Vaishnav Janto Tene Kahiye, which is a poem by the 15th century Gujarati saint poet Narsi Mehta, and so on. When he was assassinated on 30th January 1948 by the Hindu extremist Nathuram Godse, the last words to leave his lips were, Hey Ram. Ram for Gandhi was the embodiment of Kripa, Daya, Karuna, Udarta. A true Vaishnav, he believed, was one who understood the pain of others, Je peed parai jane, who recognized the humanity of the most downtrodden, Patit Pavan, Deen Dayal, and so many other expressions of divine compassion, empathy, love, and care. Whether as a god or a king, Ram for Gandhi was nothing if not Kripa Sindhu, an ocean of generosity and compassion, Karuna Nidhan, a repository of kindness and forgiveness. As Tulsidas has sung in his Vinay Patrika, ऐसो को उदार जगमाही बिन सेवा जो द्रवे दीन पर राम सरिस को नाही. There is no one like Ram who constantly gives to those who are the most wretched, the weakest. Now, have we completely forgotten Gandhiji? Gandhiji, who was an old man who had seen the worst of politics, but still retained to the very end his guileless smile and his heartfelt laughter of a child, of an innocent child. Gandhiji, who called himself a mother to young relatives like his orphaned grandniece Manu, who came to live with him in his final years and took care of him through the most stressful chapters of partition violence leading up to his brutal killing. Why can a man not have maternal feelings? He rightly asked. I am Manu's mother. Gandhiji, who chanted every day Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram, Patit Pavan Sita Ram, Ishwar Allah Tero Naam, Sabko Sanmati De Bhagwan, who said, God has no religion. I am a Hindu, I am also a Muslim, I am a Christian, I am a Buddhist and a Jew. Gandhiji, who was a Vaishnav Banya, but he followed a Jain spiritual preceptor named Srimad Rajchandra. Gandhiji, for whom Ram Naam was Satya itself, truth, not a ground for division, hatred, othering, or himsa, hantum ichha. I want to circle back to where I began. The warlike gods and muscular heroes we seem to worship nowadays, forever meting out punishment, ever ready to crush and attack anyone who is weak and vulnerable, seeking revenge for wrongs that may or may not have been committed in a historical past that can be constructed and manipulated at will. Gandhi had broken the vicious cycle of colonial oppression through the radical techniques of nonviolence and soul force. But in resurrecting models of masculinity that have no time for the wretched of the earth, a mere few decades after independence and decolonization, we seem to be heading into yet another chapter of our unfinished struggle for Swaraj. As Gandhiji said, we are riding a tiger. Thank you.